Foster Power is a movement to improve the lives and futures of youth in Florida's foster care system by creating access to information on their benefits, protections, and legal rights. Foster Power is the first app of its kind nationwide and was made by lawyers with youth input. Visit fosterpower.org/app to download the free mobile app today.
Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at @theimprintnews. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business, policy, and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the SafeCamp Audio Network. Check out our show page and all of SafeCamp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or at SafeCamp Audio on social media. On today's episode, Kerrie Lonard, child advocate for the state of Kansas, joins us to talk about a very interesting survey that her office did over the summer to learn more about the nature of why foster parents stop fostering. We're going to quickly get to that interview today, as I've been traveling and thus not really as dialed into the news as I usually am. But I did want to plug a couple of upcoming events that we're doing here at Fostering Media Connections, and then talk about one really important series we recently published at the Imprint, and also do a quick update on a few things we talked about last week on the podcast. All right, so let's do the events first. This Thursday, November 9th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Getting to Self-Sufficiency, Helping Foster Youth Thrive as Young Adults. So the past 5 years, we've seen some really exciting new strategies and policies develop around helping older youth in foster care achieve independence in a healthy way. The goal of this is to basically put together a terrific panel, which we have done, of guests that are going to showcase some of these really promising new ideas as we discuss a new path to permanency, housing affordability, financial empowerment, and a few other really important topics. If you want to register for that, which is totally free thanks to our sponsor for this discussion, Binti, you would go to imprintnews.org/webinars. Once again, totally free thanks to our sponsor, Binti. To register, just go to imprintnews.org/webinars. A little later this month, Tuesday, November 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, right before the Thanksgiving holiday, you can join our Youth Voices Rising team for Redefining Holidays, How to Navigate Triggering Times. The Youth Voices Rising team will offer tips and advice to foster youth as the winter holidays approach, which often stirs up difficult memories and feelings for some young people. Come learn about some methods to find community, empowering yourself and others. Panelists will also offer advice to caregivers and social workers on ways to help youth through these difficult times, not just limited to the winter holidays or birthdays, other holidays. Panelists are also going to speak on ways to incorporate inclusion of those who may not have family to visit on special days. So both discussions are free. Both are going to be great. Check them out. All right, now onto the Imprint 3-part series we published last week, which is titled Born of History, a Tulalip Youth's Journey to Indigenize Child Welfare. Now, on a basic level, this is an extremely compelling story about Dre Thornock's journey as they enter foster care, as they are removed from their tribal community, and as they end up first being fostered and then in a guardianship arrangement with a white Christian couple in Washington state. Our reporter, Nancy Marie Spears, also chronicles Dre's emerging discoveries about their own identity, their decision to leave that guardianship home, and ultimately their advocacy work on reforming the Tulalip child welfare system, which is known as Budacha. Another significant detail about Dre, they are believed to be the first foster youth in the history of the Tulalip tribe to gain access to their full record from Budacha. So digging into that history, as well as the longer history of colonization and subjugation of the Tulalip tribe, that enabled Spears to really tell an important story in the wake of the Supreme Court's surprisingly staunch affirmation of the Indian Child Welfare Act last year. Just We've discussed the Indian Child Welfare Act many times on this podcast. It was passed in the late 70s, and there's a lot of specifics in the Indian Child Welfare Act, but on a grand scale, it requires that tribes have a right to intervene in cases when Native American children who are members of the tribe are at the center of a child welfare case, and that placements with the child's relative, or if that's not possible, with members of the tribe, are prioritized when kids who are from tribal communities who are indigenous and members of federally recognized tribes are either going to be removed into foster care or are going to be placed into a guardianship or an adoption situation. And as I alluded to, there was a major Supreme Court case, Brackeen v. Holland, which I covered at length here at the Imprint, which many were worried that the Supreme Court was going to chip away at the protections of the Indian Child Welfare Act. As a matter of opinion on that case, turns out they very staunchly reaffirmed most of, if not really everything, in the Indian Child Welfare Act. But the reality is that the Indian Child Welfare Act, now strongly affirmed again, protects to a certain extent the ability of tribes to conduct child protection services in a way that comports with tribal values, in a way where it is prioritized that children remain with members of their family or tribe. But just because that ability is protected does not guarantee that that is how things will be. And as this series recounts, in Dre's case, they were placed into foster care, and not long after, they were separated from the tribal community, and then they were placed with a family that was not their relatives, not members of tribes. And that was the work of Tulalip tribe's Bodacha, which is why Dre now works to push for reforms and improvements to that tribal child welfare system. And at the same time, our reporter, Nancy Marie Spears, provides really important detail about how historical and ongoing systemic forces that actually make it challenging for many tribal systems to avail themselves fully of their right to a different path on child welfare. So I don't want to give away too much more than that about the series. It is super compelling. Dre's story is amazing. What they are doing in the community right now is amazing. And it's just a very good up-close look at how policy plays out on the ground, how history impacts policy, why things may be different than one might assume, given the protections of ICWA. All right, and so last couple of things for this week, and then as I mentioned, we're going to come back to a few things we talked about last week on the podcast. First is the Georgia investigation. If you listened last week, we talked about the fact that the Senate Judiciary Committee's subcommittee on Human Rights launched this inquiry into Georgia's child welfare system. This was more than about a year ago at this point, and has now started to hold hearings and press conferences to sort of use witnesses to kind of echo some of the findings, hold a press conference to kind of announce some of the findings. They did a congressional hearing on Capitol Hill that was followed in short order by the press conference, and then by a trio of judges and former judges who testified about their observations about what's going wrong, frankly, from the perspective of these judges when it comes to the operation of the child welfare system there. So this is all stuff we mostly covered last time. In Georgia, this investigation has prompted a lot of ink, a lot of news reporting, lots of coverage, some pushback on the investigation from the subject of the investigation, which is the state's Division of Family and Children's Services. My interest, though, as we talked about, is what possible national outcome or progression this is going to have, since it is a congressional national subcommittee. We asked as much of Ossoff's folks, just, where is this going? Are other states going to be involved in this? Are you inquiring into any other systems? Are you going to do legislation? Is that where this is headed? They frankly did not address that. They did not really comment or provide comment from our questions, certainly around whether other states were being considered. They did point, in responding to us, to Senator Ossoff's opening statement from one of his hearings. And I'm going to read that, since essentially this was their answer. And I'm quoting here from Senator Ossoff at the hearing. "The allegations of widespread failures that leave Georgia foster children vulnerable to abuse and neglect demand investigation. Georgia, as a case study informing the subcommittee's inquiry will yield crucial insights about threats to the health and safety of foster children nationwide. So, given that this is their answer, my inference is that this is it. Georgia is the only state being scrutinized as part of this subcommittee on human rights inquiry. It is a case study, as Ossoff describes. It's the other part of the sentence, just to read it again, that this case study, quote, will yield crucial insights about threats to the health and safety of foster children nationwide. That phrasing kind of makes me think there is not legislation forthcoming from this. That is just a guess, but that phrasing to me sounds like a report at most, maybe really just a list of recommendations on policy or potential legislation, but not that we're getting, what would have amounted to the Georgia Case Study Act of 2023. So I don't see that as coming, just based on what their response was and what they pointed to. Obviously, if there are more developments with that, we will keep you posted. And then the other thing we mentioned last week was the Prevention Clearinghouse that is connected to the Family First Act and the Biden administration's plan to draw some more input on that. I think I kind of glazed over this too much last week, and there is an update that I wanted to alert people about anyway. So I'm going to take another swing here and just do the chronology again. When the Family First Act was passed in 2018, there was a clearinghouse that was stood up, the 4E Prevention Services Clearinghouse, and its job is to vet potential models and service and programs as being well-supported, supported, or promising based on their evidence. And if you can get one of those three ratings, especially if you can get the well-supported rating, you're in line and eligible for states to draw down Title 4E funding from the government to spend on these programs in order to try and prevent the use of foster care in some child welfare cases. I know that was all a mouthful. We've gone over this a bunch of different times on the podcast, but that is basically what the clearinghouse is there to do. They are not going to let states spend money on willy-nilly on what they want in terms of foster care prevention. You have to have been vetted by this clearinghouse and approved. So the Trump administration put out the first kind of guidebook on how the clearinghouse was going to proceed. Early in the Biden administration, the administration sought comment on that kind of 1.0 guidebook for how the clearinghouse operates. In that initial inquiry from the Biden administration, they did stress that they wanted to hear on technical aspects of review, but also wanted to hear around issues of equity. They had just put out pretty shortly before this an executive order. I think Biden signed it on like the first or second day that he was in office, basically instructing the entirety of the executive branch to do a deep dive and really scrutinize whether there are opportunities to improve equity like all federal programs. And this was one of them. So they put that out there. My understanding, kind of from people who are much more familiar with the clearinghouse and the comments period that happened, is that ultimately they did not really seriously consider incorporating those issues of equity and things around that into the first rewrite of this clearinghouse guidebook, which is now out. The Biden administration has put out their draft of a 2.0 guidebook for how this clearinghouse is supposed to work. I know this sounds all very wonky, but this clearinghouse is the gateway that will, to some extent, decide whether or not Family First as a front-end proposition in child welfare really makes any difference at all. Just to be perfectly blunt about it, they will play a role in that. So the 2.0 draft is out, and now they are asking for more comment on this. And one significant difference between when they first solicited comment and now is that the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families, which is kind of in the middle of the child welfare power structure within the federal government, there's ACF is kind of the top child welfare agency, the Administration on Children and Families. ACYF, the one I just mentioned, is kind of in the middle, and then Children's Bureau is part of ACYF. So there's a new ACYF commissioner who was confirmed well after that first round of inquiry. And, my understanding is that her name is Rebecca Jones-Gaston, by the way. I don't know why I'm being cryptic about that. She's led two different systems, Maryland and Oregon, who were among the first states to really get compliant with the Family First Act and start to tap into federal funding for foster care prevention. My understanding is she is keenly interested in kind of hearing, again, more comments on how to make the law more equitable, how to maybe change the rules or restructure this thing in a way, among other things, that's going to give a more reasonable path to certain programs that were created by and for communities of color, in particular, the Black community, as well as the Native American community. And so that is why this is something that's worth me bringing up twice in as many episodes. I also wanted to call out that there is a listening session for anybody that really wants to geek out and learn more about this from somebody smarter than me. The administration is holding this listening session next week, November 14th at 3 p.m. So for anybody that wants to check that out, I will drop the link for registering to that in our show notes. I am registered, so I will check it out and probably do a little hit for our subscribers at the Imprint on that. All right, so all that said, when we come back, our interview with Kansas child advocate Kerrie Lonard.
Hi, everyone. It's journalist Lisa Ling, and I'm sure you will agree that it is so important for there to be good, trustworthy journalism on children and families, and nobody does that better than the Imprint. I am such a devotee of the Imprint, and I listen to the Imprint weekly podcast because it is so comprehensive and so substantive, and it is by far the best news source for anyone interested in critical issues like foster care, juvenile justice, youth homelessness, and so much more. During this holiday season of giving, I hope you'll consider donating to the Imprint. If you do so between now and the end of the year, your donation will be doubled thanks to the National Newsmatch campaign. To give is so easy. Go to imprintnews.org/donate. That's imprintnews.org/donate. Thank you so much.
All right, we are joined today by Kerrie Lonard, child advocate for the state of Kansas, who joins us to talk about an interesting survey her office did over the summer to learn more about the nature of why foster parents stop fostering. Not all of them, just the ones that did. So, Kerrie, thank you for joining us to talk about this on the Imprint Weekly podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to join you this afternoon.
All right, so we got to get these folks to know you a little bit before we grill you. Rules on this podcast, you got to give us at least one of your favorites. Here are the categories: TV show or movie, sports team, musical group, or book. You only have to give me one. You can give me more if you want. Kerrie, what do you got?
Okay. Well, people know me very well. They know that I'm not very good at pop culture stuff. So let me see. Favorite sports team. That's easy since I live in Lawrence, Kansas. So KU Rock Chalk basketball and, any team that my boys play on. So watch a lot of high school football.
That's a good answer. I don't know if anybody's put that before. My kids' teams. My boys, the defending national champion Yukon Huskies, are coming to Kansas. So I might see it. Maybe we could grab lunch before we just paste you guys. So I think maybe we should talk a little bit before we get into this really interesting survey about just like who you are and what this office is, because it's pretty new. You came to this in 2021 when they created it from Kansas Legal Services, which I know they do a bunch of different stuff, right, in foster care. So what were you particularly involved in? Because they do like kinship navigation, right? I'm imagining some counsel, all that.
They do. Yeah. So I was with Kansas Legal Services, which is our legal services corporation service here in Kansas statewide. And I'd been with Kansas Legal Services for almost 15 years as a staff attorney and then managing attorney. So we did a lot of different areas of law, but one particular area was I did a lot of work in child needed care cases here in Kansas, representing foster parents, grandparents, parents, as well as guardian ad litem work.
Oh, wow. So really the whole gamut.
The whole gamut.
Yeah,
yes.
That's really interesting. Is that the experience of a lot of lawyers for KLS? They get thrown into the mix repping kids or parents. You don't know where your next case, which side you're going to be on. Not that there's sides, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do think that a lot of our offices across the state do have that general practice model. Some of our offices had individual contracts in their area to provide representation in child needed care cases. So our office was one of those.
So now you are the child advocate, which means different things in different places. Why don't you tell folks in the Kansas iteration of the child advocate's office what your day-to-day kind of primary responsibilities are?
Sure. So our office was created, I think, as you had mentioned, in the fall of 2021 by executive order. And we were essentially created to receive complaints or concerns from any citizen in Kansas regarding a child who is either alleged to be a child in need of care or adjudicated a child in need of care. Kansas, nationally has been under a lot of scrutiny in regards to our child welfare services and system. And this was one step towards hopefully bringing voice to those who are experiencing the system and then reviewing policies and practices and working towards change and improvement.
Interesting. So really anybody can call you guys to kind of initiate something. It doesn't mean you're going to investigate or anything, but
correct.
Yeah.
So any concerned citizen at this time. Now, at some point, if the office is put into statute, that may be limited or better defined. But at this point, we'll take a concern from any concerned citizen regarding a child.
Gotcha. As she just alluded to, if it becomes in statute, this was set up by the current governor. Correct. Part of her administration. This is very thorny. This comes up in different states. Is it going to be independent? Is it part of a department? So this is part of the administration. I'm not going to ask you to weigh in. Obviously, you're somewhat down with it because you took the job. But can you describe to people in a structure like yours what is put in place to ensure that your office is kind of walled off and can represent the interests of the office as opposed to other parts of the administration?
Sure. Under our present executive order, we are housed within our Department of Administration, but we're modeled similar to our long-term care ombudsman office, which has been in statute, both federal and state law, for a long time and has been within the Department of Administration really for technical support and otherwise operate independently. So we receive support for IT and HR and accounting, but essentially outside of that, we're given the ability to operate independently.
Gotcha. Okay, so why we're here today to have this conversation is because one of the things that Kerrie's office has undertaken is this interesting survey. And I know the numbers that prompted it, I'm going to get from her a little bit more of kind of what came next. But between, I'm sort of reading a little bit from the preface, but between 2019 and 2022, which we all know, big caveat, COVID is in the middle of that, there were about 2,500 licenses for family foster homes that closed. And during that time, there were 2,000 new ones. So just in the back of the envelope style of math, that's a net loss of 500 foster homes.
Correct.
Can you talk about what prompted you to take that information and get going on this? Like, how did it all start that you were going to kind of endeavor to look further into that reality?
So here in Kansas, we have a joint committee on child welfare system oversight. Okay. And we have, as you alluded to, we have a governor that child welfare has been a key piece of what she's interested in improving in our state. We have a lot of legislators who are very passionate about improving our child welfare system. And that joint committee meets on a regular basis throughout the year. And in September of 2022, during a committee meeting, they had that number that you just referenced sparked quite a bit of conversation, particularly when we are talking about placement stability issues here in Kansas. And so if we're losing almost 500 homes, what is happening when we're talking about then not being able to provide stable placement for our youth? And when you look at that number, Kansas lost more than double the national average during that period of time.
During that window, during that 3-year window?
During that window, yeah. Correct.
Yeah. So surely not alone. I mean, we do an annual collection. I think we're the only ones that still do this of each state's, licensed foster care numbers. And there certainly are quite a few states that have, certainly since COVID, seen the numbers go down.
So the Joint Committee, we're really concerned about getting down to the heart of why families were no longer wanting to be licensed, given everything that's going on. And they oftentimes, they hear stories and that foster families will reach out to them talking about their experiences and things that need to be improved. And we hear the word retaliation a lot. And so I think that sparked the desire to really, again, get to the heart of why families were leaving. And so they had tasked our division to initiate a survey and reach out to these families, hoping that it came from a place then of independence and neutrality, not from the agency themselves or our child placing agencies, who they may or may not have a good relationship with.
Just some context on what Kerrie just said, with child placing agencies, Kansas is one of lots of states have some contingency of privatized foster care. Kansas and Florida are really the only ones where it's entirely private.
Yeah, 100% privatized.
Yeah, maybe Texas someday soon. I don't know. So,
Looks like they're moving that direction.
Yeah. We'll get to the findings in a minute. I'm going to just interject a wonky question here that I think may resonate or be interesting to some of the listeners of this show, because as I mentioned, the umbrella number of people you could reach out to for this was 2,534 to be exact. And you got 609 responses, which is an enormous response rate as somebody who works for an organization that tries to do that, right? Like, we're happy if it's like a couple percent, and that's a very high rate. So I think people, and I know other people are in this situation. So the first thing that tells you is that people are very energized to share what their perspective is. But what did you guys like? I would love you to talk a little bit about your process for how you disseminate it, because obviously you guys are doing something right in how you reach people.
Well, I think you nailed it. Number one, which is I think that the families really wanted to have their voice heard. So I think our response rate really had to do with the opportunity to really share about their experiences and ways that we could do better. How we broached it was we coordinated with our Department for Children and Families, our Department for Health and Environment, and then our Children's Alliance, which is the networking alliance for all of those child placing agencies. And so we were able to work with those groups, and they were extremely supportive. They also want this information so that they can make some improvements as well and be responsive. And so they provided us the names, the addresses, and if we had emails for those individuals for contact information. For those that we had emails, so we created a Survey Monkey, just your basic Survey Monkey survey, formulated questions. It was all hands on deck here. So I have I always talk about my mighty team of 5. And, we pulled, and we, again, as you noted, we've only been in existence for, at that point, less than a year. So we pulled together, created the questions. We had that contact information then and sent out the survey by email. Those that we did not have an email, we did send then just in the mail.
So the primary was email, backup was mail.
Primary was email, yes.
Yeah, Survey Monkey. Yep, we use that too. Pretty effective. Pretty effective, simple way to get to.
It was, yeah. The response rate was amazing.
Yeah, and just a lot of pizzas delivered to work maybe after hours on this stuff. Cool.
Yes, and so of those, almost half then also provided us consent then for follow-up phone calls, for us to get more extensive kind of qualitative information and really bring a humanity to some of those responses that they provided.
Wow. And have you done, is that still in process? You're like calling everybody back, or because this is pretty recent.
We tackled it the best that we could, given our other responsibilities and knowing that this is, one, project that we took on. So we issued a preliminary report. So it was in the September Joint Committee meeting where they tasked us with reaching out to these families. And the initial request was that we tried to provide an opportunity for some feedback when they came back in November. So we moved very quickly with the Survey Monkey and provided a preliminary report then to the November Joint Committee meeting, noting that we were working on those phone calls to reach people individually.
And, obviously what we're talking about here, families leaving the system. I mean, some of it is natural. I mean, obviously not every person is going to foster forever. So you lose people just for rational life choices. So they move, they're not kids anymore. Toto, I had to finish that. I can't believe I just said that. And that, is linked to a state's capacity to take kids into foster care, which I think is just often, is me opining a little bit, just like not factored into the conversation about like, should we take kids? Should we not take kids? It was like assuming an infinite supply of the caregiving. And I thought, before we get to the finding, one thing you noted in the report from, I think it was from another audit that maybe you guys did, I don't know, that the state, and we've heard this when we do our research on foster care capacity around the country, as a state, it's not necessarily the case that you don't have the capacity you need in foster care, but that belies kind of more acute problems in like specific areas. So you might have a theoretical number that you need for like beds, but that doesn't matter if this part of one county or these two counties just don't have any capacity, because then you're faced with like, do I have to send a kid hours away from their parents or whatever?
Exactly. So I believe as our legislative post audit had surveyed open homes just a year or two before, and it was their study and audit that, as you noted, that Kansas technically had enough beds for the number of kids that were in care, but they weren't the appropriate placements and weren't reaching particularly those kids with those acute needs.
Yeah. I remember one, like early on when we started that project, one state being like, it really was eye-opening. They sent us the numbers and they were like, just so you know, really literally like in an email, I know these numbers look like we have a lot of foster parents, but we don't have any in this county, and we don't have nearly enough who would be willing to take a teen in. So we really have problems. And it's like, damn, you're just telling the media that, we weren't even asking you. So yeah, people are energized to talk about this.
No, and I think that was telling not only in our response, but just the number of folks then who were willing to speak with us then on the phone and have those conversations, which, people are very open about their experiences and their frustrations. And I think had some really, really important feedback.
Before I was adopted, I felt like my life was already over.
My biggest fear was that I would age out and not know how to be sufficient on my own.
At a certain age, they don't want you, you're troubled and stuff.
The clock is ticking for the more than 125,000 kids waiting to be adopted from foster care. Help the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption prevent them from aging out without a permanent family. Learn more at davethomasfoundation.org.
There were certainly some things that jumped out to me. I would love to run them by you, but let's start with you. You are the primary initial recipient of this report that your office did. Let's start here. Was there a single finding in here that really stood out to you immediately and that you feel should be addressed the fastest? And we can get some more, but
that's a tough one because I feel like they overlap in so many different ways. I think that the finding, which I found probably personally the most interesting, was the number of homes that left that were willing to take our older youth. And we know that that's the age that our older youth are really the ones that we are struggling the most, that have the mental health and externalizing behaviors that we're having a hard time maintaining placement stability. So knowing that we have this large group that we're leaving, that we're willing to take our older youth, and what is it that we need to bridge then to keep those families?
That's rough to contemplate because that so many states are going through that right now. Now, were you able to drill down on specifically why those families were choosing to leave? I mean, did you gain some insight into that, maybe from the phone calls?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with the communication. And what information is being provided to our families. And then correlated with that is what level of support and training are they being provided? And then the opportunity to meet that youth's needs. So mental health services in Kansas, we struggle. And so our families are not getting the support that they need to meet the youth that are placed in their home.
What would you say?
They also struggled with respite services. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask on the mental health front, what do you perceive to be the main barriers, maybe unique to Kansas? Is it a lack of available options for referral or?
Yeah, and I'd have to flip to find the study, but we were ranked one of the worst states as far as mental health overall in a number of different areas. We don't have the number of mental health providers in Kansas for our population is low. But we also struggle with having the necessary expertise, particularly in our rural areas. And then placement stability, again, plays a huge factor in regards to being able to provide those mental health services for our youth.
So one of the main reasons cited here by foster parents who left was a lack of agency support. I think it was 48%. But then when you look at the respondents who put other, there maybe it was a little higher than that also. So, that's a tough one. I mean, what do you make of that? As obviously, again, you're kind of in a unique corner of the department, but the department has a little bit of a degree of separation from these parents. So I guess I'm curious what you've heard about that sense, both from the private providers who played ball and worked with you on building this and from the state about where to go from finding that 1 in every 2 foster parents feels that they were not supported properly by, the foster care provider.
So some of the feedback that we received, and I think is consistent with what we're hearing across the board, is that our case management staff are carrying high caseloads. We have high worker turnover. And so when our families are not feeling like they're being supported, a lot of times that had to do with just not being responsive, not returning phone calls, not being available. And when they were, not really providing concrete supports and responses to what the needs were. And so I know that our child placing agencies are really looking at what training and supports they can provide. So here in Kansas, I think something that is unique compared to some states is that our foster families are assigned their own worker specifically to their family through their child placing agency. And so they are able to provide support and working then to coordinate, I think, efforts between that worker and then our case management team who's working with the child and then the natural family. So they're working on some of those pieces of it. Workforce is a huge issue here in Kansas, just like I think in many states across the board. And so really looking at growing that workforce, providing the important supervision that is needed. With our high worker turnover, a lot of our staff are coming into situations overloaded and really feeling, I think, that they're having to put out these fires over here and then not being able to be responsive to our families over here. So some of that is the supervision piece. So we have a cane coach program that's being initiated. And I think that there's a lot of folks that are encouraged by that program and the feedback that they're receiving.
I think maybe like tangentially connected, well, certainly tangentially connected, but not quite the same, was this group, pretty significant group, who felt they were not respected. About half reported they did feel that way. 1 in 5 felt they weren't. And the term that keeps coming up in the report that really resonates when you're is that they were treated like babysitters, which I would take to mean no one asked them much of anything.
No one asked them much of anything, or they were, I think a lot of time what we're hearing is their schedules were not respected. They weren't being communicated to. If they were asking questions, they were either shut down or told that it was not their business. One of the encouraging, I think, hopefully transitions here in Kansas is our Bill of Rights for both foster youth and foster parents was passed this session by our legislature. So it's always been in policy, and now it's been adopted in statute. And so it does have specific language regarding being treated with respect as a professional member of the team and an opportunity to be heard. And so we are hoping that just in providing those rights to our families and to our youth and to our professionals, that they'll really be brought in as a professional member of the team.
Yeah, it's not an easy needle to thread, right? Because the reality is that foster parents don't have like a legal standing in a case. So they can't provide input in such a way where it's like compelled to be acted on necessarily. But on the other end, it's not like, who would want to be doing such a vital role and then just feel like no one's even taking a note when I'm saying, I'm worried about this kid doing this or this behavior or a good thing. Johnny likes baseball, whether he's here or not, he should always have an opportunity to play. Stuff like
right.
that.
And I think there was one of the quotes that we noted in our report was from a foster parent who really wanted the opportunity to voice the good things too about parents. Like we wanted the opportunity to share with the court and share with the professionals and celebrate when families were moving in the direction that they needed to reintegrate. But we also wanted to be able to share when the children in our home were struggling with something and to be heard.
Yeah. What did you make of, I thought it was really interesting. So you guys kind of grouped it in one section by the number of years of experience that foster parents have. And the kind of, I don't know if it was counterfactual or counterintuitive, the group that had the most positive experience coming out, I guess, of being foster parents were ones who had been a foster parent for 3 to 9 years.
Yeah, we thought those numbers were interesting. Yeah.
And then the ones who had been in for 9 or more years, which is like super caregiver. That's a rare group that make it that long.
Right.
Had the least good things or the most negative things to say. So yeah, I'm sure it's just hypothesis, but what did that make you think? Surmise?
Well, yeah. So, we talked about this as we looked at those numbers because we did think they were interesting. So the group that we're in for a short period of time, I think that number did not surprise us because I think we know that there's going to be folks that find that it's just not the right fit for them. But I think that was also telling in that, it only takes one negative experience or frustration really for them to say, I don't think this is the right thing. So I think that highlighted areas that we can do better at the start. The group that has stayed in for 9+ years, we hypothesized that probably they just had more placements, more interactions, longer experiences. So it was more likely that they're going to have a number of different experiences, good and bad.
Yeah, that's probably a good guess. I mean, at 9 years, your need for support past just the financial support you might need, probably pretty low, right?
Right.
So
right.
You don't need any help, but you've seen it all. So that's probably at 9 years, you're ready to be like, here's what I've seen.
That was our thought, is that that represented that group.
Yeah. There was kind of a little I'm going to guess, I don't think I saw it in the sort of reasons for leaving part, but you noted it elsewhere that there were a certain number of caregivers who would have stayed longer, but because they maybe had adopted or they had a lot of kids, were coming up against the max number of children you could have. So like how big was that contingency? Because you guys do end up recommending in this report that you find some ability for a waiver in certain cases for stuff like this.
Right. It was a small percentage as far as this particular survey, but it's also something that our division has heard through concerns that have been voiced to us outside of the survey itself. And so when we're looking at capacity issues and families who have experience and want to continue fostering, then we did think it was important for the state to at least take a moment to really explore what exceptions might be appropriate, what were the reasons that those policies were in place, and does it make sense to make particular exceptions for certain families or certain situations. And same with the other exception when we talk about capacity issues with childcare being licensed for both as a childcare provider as well as a foster home.
So childcare on this, I'm less familiar with this. So was that situation somebody is a foster parent or a family is a foster family, and then maybe mom or dad runs to take care or childcare out of that house during the day? That's not allowed right now in Kansas?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we had some individuals who felt that they could open an in-home daycare, be able to provide for those children that they were the foster parents for, but also then be providing childcare for others in the community. And so right now in Kansas, that was not something that you either had to be a childcare licensed or a foster home licensed. You couldn't be both.
Gotcha.
And childcare is another huge barrier for families in Kansas. And so we really thought it was important at least to explore what the reason was behind it and whether it makes sense to have some exceptions or a different look at being duly licensed.
Yeah. I will link folks to this report so you can look at how it's presented. It's a very legible, easy to digest report. So I think it's good in that sense. It won't take you an hour and a half to read or anything.
No, we tried to keep it
pretty
short and
distilled
sweet.
down. Last question for you though is just how has this been received? That's the thing. You put reports out, maybe somebody reads it, maybe somebody don't. But I would think that probably some legislators paid attention to this. What's the feedback you guys have gotten thus far?
So we've had both legislatures as well as our case management providers and our CPAs. We've received some well-received responses and positive feedback that it sparked some good conversations internally for them to make some changes. And so that's, I think there's a number of initiatives that had already started. And I think this is just hopefully guiding some of those.
Yeah. I know you have to be a little careful because it's, of your job here, but would it be safe to say that if there is a response of some formality to what you guys did here, we would see that in next legislative session, right? That might be the time when somebody might have a conversation about crafting new policy or whatever around.
Right. In our joint, I referenced our joint committee is very active and they're very, driven to make some significant changes here in Kansas. And so they've met already this summer, and we'll be meeting in the fall to be looking at what potential legislation, whether it's, through budget initiatives or other initiatives.
All right, Kerrie Lonard, child advocate for the state of Kansas. Thank you for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks to Kerrie Lonard, child advocate for the state of Kansas, for joining us today. And thanks to Foster Power, a movement to improve the lives and futures of youth in foster care by creating access to information on their benefits, protections, and legal rights, for sponsoring this episode of the Imprint Weekly Podcast. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web, or Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Onjoko, with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you would support our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, super easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow the Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @theImprintNews, and you can visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can always reach us over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.